I was standing in my driveway in Scottsdale, Arizona, staring at the foundation crew as they poured concrete for my new detached garage, when I noticed her marching across the street like she owned the entire neighborhood. Sharon Patterson, the HOA president, was a woman in her late 40s with that particular haircut that screamed for a manager in every retail establishment within a 50-mile radius. Her face was already twisted into an expression of outrage before she even reached my property line. "Excuse me, Vincent Harrison, but what exactly do you think you are doing?" Sharon's voice carried that shrill quality that made dogs whimper and children hide behind their parents. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and walked over to meet her, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Good morning, Sharon. I'm building a detached garage, as you can see. I submitted all the plans to the HOA Architectural Committee 3 months ago and received approval. I also have all the necessary permits from the city." Sharon's face turned an alarming shade of red that clashed with her blonde highlights. "I don't care what some incompetent committee member approved. This is completely unacceptable. The noise, the trucks, the mess. You're destroying the aesthetic of our community." The construction foreman, a burly guy named Mike who had been in the business for 20 years, gave me a sympathetic look. He had clearly dealt with HOA nightmares before. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I kept all my documentation. "Sharon, I have the HOA approval letter right here, signed by 3 committee members including yourself. The approval is dated February 15th. She barely glanced at my phone. "I don't remember signing that, and even if I did, I'm revoking the approval effective immediately. Stop this construction right now or I'll call the authorities." My jaw tightened, but I maintained my composure. "You can't retroactively revoke approval after construction has begun. That's not how this works. I've already invested $15,000 in materials and labor. Everything is legal and above board." "We'll see about that," Sharon snapped, pulling out her own phone. "I'm calling the police and the city code enforcement right now. You're in violation of community standards, and I'll make sure you regret starting this project without proper authorization." I felt my blood pressure rising but forced myself to stay calm. "Sharon, I literally have proper authorization. Everything is documented. You're wasting everyone's time." She ignored me completely, already dialing on her phone. Within 30 seconds, she was speaking to someone in an exaggerated, distressed voice. "Yes, hello. I need to report an illegal construction project happening in my neighborhood. The homeowner is building without permits and destroying property values. This is an emergency." The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if it wasn't costing me money by the hour. Mike and his crew stood around awkwardly, waiting to see if they should continue working. I gestured for them to keep going while I dealt with this nonsense. "Madam, you need to leave my property now," I said firmly. "You're interfering with legal construction work." Sharon pointed her finger at me like a weapon. "I am the HOA president, which gives me the right to inspect any property in this community at any time. I'm not going anywhere until the authorities arrive and shut this down." 20 minutes later, a Scottsdale police cruiser pulled up to my house, followed shortly by a city code enforcement vehicle. Sharon looked triumphant, her arms crossed over her chest as she waited for the officials to validate her complaint. I gathered my folder of documents and walked over to meet the officers. Officer Rodriguez stepped out of the patrol car, a middle-aged Hispanic man with a tired expression that suggested he dealt with HOA disputes far too often. The code enforcement officer, a younger woman named Jennifer Mills according to her badge, carried a tablet and looked equally weary. "Good morning, officers. I'm Vincent Harrison, the homeowner," I said, extending my hand. I'm building a detached garage with full HOA approval and all necessary city permits. This woman is the HOA president, and she's claiming the construction is illegal despite having signed the approval herself. Sharon immediately launched into a tirade. "Officer, this man is destroying our neighborhood. He never received proper approval and he's violating multiple HOA covenants. I demand you stop this construction immediately." Officer Rodriguez held up his hand. "Madam, please calm down. Let's look at the documentation. Mr. Harrison, can you show me your permits?" I handed over my tablet, which contained photographs and PDFs of every document. "Here's my building permit from the city of Scottsdale, approved on March 1st. Here's the HOA Architectural Committee approval, dated February 15th, and signed by 3 committee members including Mrs. Patterson. Here's my property survey showing the garage location complies with all setback requirements. Here's the contractor's license and insurance documentation. Here's the electrical permit for the wiring work. Everything is completely legal." Jennifer Mills examined the documents carefully, scrolling through each page. "These all appear to be in order. The building permit is valid, the plans match what's being constructed, and all the signatures are legitimate." Sharon's face contorted with rage. "That's impossible. I never would have approved such an eyesore. Someone must have forged my signature." Officer Rodriguez raised his eyebrows. "Are you saying someone committed fraud and forged your signature on an official HOA document?" The question clearly caught Sharon off guard. If she claimed forgery, it would trigger a criminal investigation. If she admitted she signed it, she had no case. She sputtered for a moment before changing tactics. "Well, even if I did sign it, I was clearly misled about the scope of the project. This garage is much larger than what was proposed. It violates our community standards for accessory structures." Jennifer Mills looked at her tablet again, then at the construction site. "According to the approved plans, the garage is 24 feet by 24 feet, which is 576 square feet. The structure being built appears to match those dimensions exactly. What's the issue?" "It's too tall," Sharon insisted. "Our covenants limit accessory structures to 12 feet in height. This monstrosity is clearly taller than that." Mike the foreman overheard this and walked over. "Madam, the peak of the roof will be 14 feet, which is 2 feet under the city's maximum height requirement for residential accessory structures. The HOA covenant you're referencing was superseded by a community vote in 2022 that raised the limit to 16 feet. I have a copy of that vote result if you need to see it." Sharon looked like she wanted to explode. "This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president and I know our covenants better than anyone. You're all conspiring against me." Officer Rodriguez closed his notepad. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't see any violations here. Mr. Harrison has all the proper permits and approvals. If you have a civil dispute with the HOA, that's between you and the association, but there's no criminal activity taking place." "What about the noise ordinance?" Sharon demanded. "They started working at 7 in the morning. That's too early." Jennifer Mills shook her head. "Construction is permitted in residential areas starting at 7 a.m. on weekdays. They're in compliance." Sharon was visibly shaking with frustration now. "Fine, I'm calling the city attorney's office." "This isn't over, Vincent. I'll make your life a living hell until you tear down that garage." As she stomped back to her house, Officer Rodriguez gave me a sympathetic look. "Good luck with that one. Keep all your documentation handy. Something tells me she's not going to let this go." He was right. Over the next 3 days, Sharon called code enforcement 6 more times, each time inventing a new complaint. The foundation was allegedly poured incorrectly. The framing lumber wasn't up to code. The roof trusses were installed at the wrong angle. The electrical conduit was the wrong color. Each time, an inspector came out, verified that everything was correct, and left with an increasingly annoyed expression. On the fourth day, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney demanding that I cease construction immediately. The letter cited a laundry list of supposed violations, most of which were completely fabricated. I called my own attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in HOA disputes. "This is harassment, plain and simple," Patricia said after reviewing the letter. "They approved your project, you have all the permits, and now they're trying to stop you after you've already spent thousands of dollars. We need to respond aggressively." She drafted a letter threatening to sue the HOA and Sharon personally for tortious interference with my property rights. The letter also demanded that the HOA reimburse me for the legal fees and construction delays caused by their baseless complaints. Within 48 hours, I received a response from the HOA's attorney stating that they would not interfere further with the construction. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, when the garage was nearly complete, I came home from work to find a bright orange sticker on my front door. It was a stop work order from the city, claiming that my building permit had been revoked due to fraudulent information on the application. My heart sank. This could delay the project for months and cost me tens of thousands of dollars. I immediately called the city's building department and demanded an explanation. The clerk I spoke with sounded confused. "Mr. Harrison, according to our records, someone filed a complaint claiming that you lied about your property boundaries and that the garage is actually on your neighbor's land. We're required to investigate any such claims." "That's absolutely false," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I have a current property survey from a licensed surveyor showing exactly where the boundaries are. The garage is well within my property lines." "Can you email that survey to me?" the clerk asked. "If the complaint is baseless, we can lift the stop work order within 24 hours. I sent the survey immediately, along with a cover letter from Patricia Chen threatening legal action against whoever filed the false complaint. As I suspected, the complaint had come from Sharon Patterson. She had claimed to be a concerned neighbor and alleged that I had manipulated the survey documents. The city lifted the stop work order the next day, but the damage was done. My contractor had already scheduled his crew on another job, and we lost a week of work time. The delay cost me an extra $2,000 in extended equipment rentals and rescheduling fees. Patricia advised me to file a lawsuit against Sharon and the HOA for harassment and economic damages. "She's crossed the line from being a nuisance to actively causing you financial harm with false complaints. A judge will not look kindly on this behavior." I agreed, and we filed the lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court. The complaint detailed every false report Sharon had made, every baseless complaint to the city, and every dollar I had lost due to her interference. We sued for $25,000 in actual damages, plus punitive damages for malicious conduct. The day after Sharon was served with the lawsuit, things escalated to a whole new level. I was at work when my phone rang. It was my neighbor, an elderly man named Robert Chen who lived next door. "Vincent, you need to come home right now," Robert said urgently. "That crazy HOA woman is in your backyard with some guy, and they're taking measurements of your garage. I think they're trying to damage it or something." I told my boss I had an emergency and drove home as fast as legally possible. When I arrived, I found Sharon and a man I didn't recognize standing in my backyard with a tape measure and a camera. They were documenting every aspect of the garage construction. "Get off my property right now," I shouted as I approached them. "You're trespassing." Sharon turned to face me with a smug expression. "We have every right to inspect HOA violations. This is community property." "This is my private backyard, not community property," I said firmly. "Leave immediately or I'm calling the police." The man with Sharon spoke up. "I'm Gary Mitchell, a licensed building inspector. Mrs. Patterson hired me to conduct an independent inspection of your garage to identify code violations." I pulled out my phone. "I don't care who you are. You're on my property without permission. That's trespassing." Sharon stepped toward me aggressively. "You can't intimidate us with your threats. We're documenting evidence for our legal defense. Your lawsuit is frivolous, and we're going to prove that your garage is a danger to the community." I dialed 911 while maintaining eye contact with Sharon. "Yes, I need to report 2 people trespassing on my property. They refuse to leave." Within 10 minutes, Officer Rodriguez arrived again. He seemed genuinely annoyed when he saw it was another dispute between Sharon and me. "Mrs. Patterson, please tell me you have the homeowner's permission to be in his backyard." "I don't need his permission," Sharon insisted. "The HOA covenants give me the right to inspect properties for violations." Officer Rodriguez shook his head. "That's not how property rights work. HOA covenants don't override criminal trespass laws. You need to leave this property now." "This is outrageous," Sharon protested. "He's the one breaking the law with his illegal construction, and you're treating me like a criminal." "Madam, I've been here 4 times now, and every time the homeowner has shown me valid permits and approvals. If you don't leave right now, I'm going to cite you for trespassing." Gary Mitchell, the inspector Sharon had hired, had already started walking toward the front yard. He clearly wanted no part of a criminal trespass citation. Sharon followed reluctantly, but not before shouting, "This isn't over, Vincent. I'll see you in court." After they left, Officer Rodriguez took my statement and gave me a report number. "You should request a restraining order," he suggested. "She's harassing you at this point." I called Patricia Chen and told her what happened. She agreed that a restraining order was appropriate. "This is stalker-level behavior. She's obsessed with stopping your project, even though she has no legal basis for her actions. Let's get you protection from the court." We filed for a restraining order the next day, requesting that Sharon be prohibited from coming within 100 feet of my property and from making any further false reports to authorities about my construction project. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Sharon launched a campaign to turn the neighborhood against me. She sent a mass email to every homeowner in the HOA claiming that I was building an illegal structure that would lower everyone's property values. The email was full of lies and distortions, claiming that the garage was actually a commercial workshop where I planned to run a business, that it violated setback requirements, and that it was structurally unsafe. Several of my neighbors forwarded me the email, many of them apologizing for Sharon's behavior. Most people in the neighborhood thought she was unhinged and had grown tired of her dictatorial approach to running the HOA. But a few residents believed her propaganda and began giving me dirty looks when I came home. One neighbor, a man named David Foster who lived 3 houses down, actually confronted me as I was getting my mail. "You're really selfish, you know that. Building whatever you want with no regard for how it affects the rest of us." I tried to explain that I had followed all the rules and obtained all the approvals, but David cut me off. "Sharon showed us the city reports about all the violations. You're a liar and a cheat." "What city reports?" I asked, confused. "There are no violations. Every inspection has passed." David pulled out his phone and showed me an email from Sharon. It contained what appeared to be official city documents listing numerous code violations for my property. My stomach dropped. The documents looked legitimate, complete with the city's letterhead and an inspector's signature. "Those are fake," I said immediately. "Sharon fabricated those documents. There are no violations." David shook his head in disgust. "Of course you'd say that. Just admit that you got caught breaking the rules." I went inside and forwarded the forged documents to Patricia Chen. She called me back within an hour, and her voice was deadly serious. "Vincent, these are fraudulent government documents. Creating and distributing fake official documents is a felony. Sharon has crossed a line that could land her in prison." "What do we do?" I asked. "We report this to the police immediately and to the city attorney's office. Document forgery is not a civil matter. It's a crime." I drove to the Scottsdale police station and filed a report, providing copies of the forged documents and explaining how Sharon had distributed them to damage my reputation. The detective who took my report, a woman named Susan Miller, seemed very interested in the case. "We take document forgery seriously, especially when it involves impersonating government officials," Detective Miller said. "I'll need to get copies of the real inspection reports from the city and compare them to these fakes. If they're fraudulent, we'll be arresting Mrs. Patterson." The investigation took a week. During that time, the restraining order hearing took place. I presented evidence of Sharon's repeated trespassing, false reports to authorities, and harassment. Sharon showed up with her own attorney and argued that she was simply performing her duties as HOA president. The judge was not impressed. "Mrs. Patterson, I've reviewed the evidence, and it's clear that you've gone far beyond any reasonable exercise of HOA authority. The homeowner has valid permits and approvals, yet you've filed numerous false complaints and trespassed on his property. I'm granting the restraining order. You are prohibited from coming within 100 feet of Mr. Harrison's property, from making any direct contact with him, and from filing any further complaints about his garage to government authorities, unless you have concrete evidence of a legitimate violation. If you violate this order, you'll be arrested for contempt." Sharon's face turned purple with rage, but her attorney wisely kept her from saying anything. As we left the courthouse, Patricia Chen smiled. "That's a good ruling. If she violates that order, she'll be in serious trouble." 3 days later, Detective Miller called me. "Mr. Harrison, we've confirmed that the documents Mrs. Patterson distributed are fraudulent. We've obtained a warrant for her arrest on charges of forgery of a government document and criminal libel. We'll be taking her into custody tomorrow morning." I felt a mixture of relief and vindication. Sharon had pushed her vendetta so far that she had actually committed serious crimes. The next morning, I watched from my window as 2 police cruisers pulled up to Sharon's house. Detective Miller and 2 uniformed officers knocked on her door and, after a brief conversation, placed Sharon in handcuffs and led her to a patrol car. The arrest made the local news. "HOA president arrested for document forgery" was the headline on the Scottsdale Independent's website. The article detailed how Sharon had created fake city inspection reports to defame a homeowner who was building a legal garage. The story spread quickly through the neighborhood, and suddenly, everyone knew the truth about Sharon's campaign against me. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Sharon as president. They also issued a formal apology to me and offered to reimburse my legal fees, though I was still planning to pursue my lawsuit to recover all my damages. Sharon's attorney negotiated a plea deal with the prosecutor's office. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of forgery and 1 count of criminal libel. The judge sentenced her to 90 days in jail, suspended pending completion of 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution of all my legal fees and construction delays, which totaled $37,000. In civil court, my lawsuit against Sharon and the HOA moved forward. The HOA quickly settled, agreeing to pay $20,000 to resolve their liability for failing to properly supervise their president, and for the initial harassment before Sharon went fully criminal. Sharon herself had no choice but to accept a judgment against her for the remaining damages, since she had already admitted in criminal court that her actions were illegal. My garage was finally completed in late June, 3 months after construction began. What should have been a straightforward 2-month project had turned into a nightmare because of one woman's irrational crusade. But the structure was beautiful, perfectly built to code, and exactly what I needed. The new HOA president, a reasonable man named Thomas Wright, came by to personally apologize for everything that had happened. I want you to know that the board is implementing new policies to prevent this kind of abuse from ever happening again. We're requiring that any compliance complaints be reviewed by the entire board before any action is taken. And we're prohibiting board members from making personal inspections of properties without the owner's consent. I appreciated his words, but I had learned a hard lesson about the dangers of HOA overreach. I started attending board meetings and became active in HOA governance to ensure that no future president could wield that kind of unchecked power. Sharon moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later, unable to face the daily reminder of her humiliation. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she had divorced and moved to Nevada to start over. Her probation required her to pay me $1,000 per month until the restitution was fully satisfied, which would take another 2 years. The garage became something of a neighborhood landmark. People would walk by and tell me they loved the design and wished they had something similar. Several neighbors asked me for my contractor's information so they could build their own accessory structures. Mike the foreman told me that he got 3 more jobs in my neighborhood directly because people saw his work on my garage. I used the garage as a workshop for my woodworking hobby, something I had been wanting to pursue for years, but never had the space. On weekends, I would spend hours in there building furniture and custom pieces. The sound insulation was excellent, so I didn't disturb any neighbors even when I was running power tools. One Saturday afternoon, about 8 months after the garage was finished, I was working on a coffee table when Robert Chen knocked on the garage door. "Vincent, do you have a minute? I wanted to ask your advice about something." I invited him in and offered him a cold drink from the mini fridge I had installed. Robert looked around admiringly at the space. "This really is a nice setup. I've been thinking about adding a workshop space at my house, but I'm worried about dealing with the HOA after everything you went through." "It's actually much better now," I assured him. "Thomas and the new board are very reasonable. Just make sure you follow the process exactly, get everything in writing, and don't start construction until you have all the approvals. The rules themselves aren't unreasonable. It was just Sharon who made everything impossible." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Do you think you could help me with the application process? I don't want to make any mistakes." Over the next few weeks, I helped Robert prepare his application for a smaller workshop addition to his existing garage. We made sure every detail was documented, every measurement was precise, and every requirement was met. When he submitted the application, the HOA Architectural Committee approved it within 2 weeks, and the city issued his permits without any issues. His project was completed smoothly in 6 weeks with zero problems. The contrast between his experience and mine was striking. The difference was entirely due to having a reasonable HOA board that followed the rules rather than a vindictive president who used her position to pursue personal vendettas. My experience with Sharon and the HOA taught me several valuable lessons. First, documentation is everything. If I hadn't kept meticulous records of every approval, every permit, and every communication, Sharon might have succeeded in shutting down my project. Second, people with unchecked power will abuse it, which is why HOAs need strong governance and oversight. Third, persistence pays off when you're in the right. Sharon threw everything she could at me, including criminal conduct, but because I stood my ground and fought back legally, justice eventually prevailed. The legal settlement money allowed me to fully furnish the garage workshop with professional-grade tools. I bought a table saw, a planer, a jointer, and a comprehensive set of hand tools. The space became my sanctuary, a place where I could create things with my own hands and forget about the stresses of work and life. I also started a side business building custom furniture pieces. What began as a hobby turned into a profitable venture, and I was earning an extra $1,500 a month from commissions. The irony was not lost on me that Sharon's email had claimed I was planning to run a business out of the garage. Her false accusation actually gave me the idea to do exactly that, though I made sure I obtained the proper home occupation permit from the city. 1 year after Sharon's arrest, I was featured in a local magazine article about HOA disputes and property rights. The reporter interviewed me about my experience and used my story as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. The article generated a lot of discussion in the community and led to several other Scottsdale HOAs implementing governance reforms similar to what our neighborhood had adopted. I also received calls from several attorneys asking if I would be willing to serve as an expert witness in other HOA dispute cases. My documentation and the clear paper trail of Sharon's misconduct made me a valuable resource for other homeowners fighting similar battles. I testified in 3 cases over the following year, helping other people defend their legal property improvements against unreasonable HOA enforcement. The most satisfying moment came about 18 months after my garage was completed. I was at a city council meeting where they were discussing proposed reforms to HOA regulations in Scottsdale. During the public comment period, I shared my story and made specific recommendations for how the city could better protect homeowners from HOA abuse. The council members were very receptive, and several of them asked detailed questions about my experience. 3 months later, the city passed a new ordinance requiring that HOAs provide homeowners with a written explanation for any denial of architectural applications, establishing a city-run mediation service for HOA disputes, and imposing fines on HOAs that made false complaints to city authorities. The ordinance was informally called the Harrison Rule in recognition of my advocacy work. I was invited to the signing ceremony, where the mayor thanked me for bringing attention to an important issue that affected thousands of Scottsdale homeowners. My relationship with my neighbors continued to improve as well. The people who had initially believed Sharon's lies eventually came around after the truth emerged. David Foster, the neighbor who had confronted me about the supposed violations, actually apologized to me at a neighborhood barbecue. "I'm sorry I didn't give you the benefit of the doubt," David said, looking genuinely remorseful. "Sharon was very convincing, and I should have asked you directly instead of just believing her accusations." I accepted his apology graciously. There was no point in holding grudges. Sharon had been the problem, not the neighbors who were misled by her lies. The neighborhood had actually become closer after the incident, united by a shared determination to prevent any future HOA president from abusing their authority. The HOA itself underwent significant reforms. The board adopted a comprehensive set of bylaws that limited the president's individual authority, required board approval for any enforcement actions, and established clear procedures for handling homeowner complaints. They also created an ombudsman position to help mediate disputes before they escalated. Thomas Wright proved to be an excellent HOA president. He was fair, transparent, and focused on maintaining property values while respecting homeowners' rights. Under his leadership, the HOA actually became a positive force in the neighborhood rather than the oppressive presence it had been under Sharon. I continued to pay my HOA dues and participate in community activities, though I remained vigilant about potential overreach. My experience had made me a strong advocate for property rights, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget what had happened when power went unchecked. Sharon completed her probation without any violations and finished paying her restitution to me. I never heard from her directly, though mutual acquaintances told me she had moved on with her life and was working as a real estate agent in Las Vegas. I hoped she had learned from her mistakes, though I suspected she was probably just as controlling and vindictive as before, just smarter about not breaking the law. My garage became a gathering place for the neighborhood. I hosted workshops where I taught basic woodworking skills to anyone who was interested. Kids would stop by to watch me work on projects, fascinated by the smell of sawdust and the sight of raw lumber being transformed into furniture. The space brought people together in ways I never anticipated when I first drew up the plans. 3 years after the initial confrontation with Sharon, I was working in the garage on a warm spring evening when my phone rang. It was Patricia Chen, my attorney. We had stayed in touch after the case concluded, and she occasionally referred clients to me who needed expert testimony in HOA disputes. "Vincent, I wanted to give you a heads up about something," Patricia said. "Sharon Patterson is suing the city of Scottsdale, claiming that they wrongfully prosecuted her and that the charges against her were politically motivated. She's also trying to reopen the civil judgment and claiming that you conspired with city officials to frame her." I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. "Are you serious? Is this ever going to end?" Patricia's voice was reassuring. "Don't worry. Her lawsuit is completely frivolous and will be dismissed quickly. She's representing herself, which is always a bad sign. The courts don't look kindly on people trying to relitigate issues that have already been decided. I just wanted you to be aware in case she tries to contact you, which would violate the restraining order." True to Patricia's prediction, Sharon's lawsuit was dismissed within 60 days. The judge's order was scathing, noting that Sharon had pleaded guilty to the criminal charges and that she couldn't now claim they were fraudulent. The judge also warned that any further frivolous filings would result in her being declared a vexatious litigant, which would require her to get court approval before filing any future lawsuits. That was the last I heard from or about Sharon Patterson. The restraining order remained in effect indefinitely, which suited me just fine. I had moved on with my life, and the garage project that had caused so much conflict was now just a normal part of my daily routine. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized how easily things could have gone differently. If I hadn't kept detailed records, if I hadn't hired a good attorney, if I hadn't stood up to Sharon's bullying, the outcome might have been very different. She might have succeeded in forcing me to tear down the garage, costing me tens of thousands of dollars, and denying me the workshop space I had wanted for years. The experience also taught me about the importance of community involvement. Before the conflict with Sharon, I had been largely disengaged from HOA governance. I paid my dues, followed the rules, and ignored the politics. After everything that happened, I understood that the people who control the HOA are the people who show up and participate. By becoming active in the association, I helped ensure that future boards would be accountable and reasonable. I also learned that some people are simply unreasonable and will abuse any power they're given. Sharon wasn't acting out of a genuine concern for the neighborhood or property values. She was a bully who enjoyed controlling others and couldn't stand anyone challenging her authority. When I dared to exercise my legal property rights, she saw it as a personal attack and responded with escalating aggression until she crossed the line into criminal conduct. The most important lesson was about standing up for what's right, even when it's expensive and stressful. It would have been easier to just tear down the garage and move on. It would have been cheaper to settle with Sharon and accept some compromise. But doing so would have rewarded her bad behavior and encouraged her to continue abusing her authority with other homeowners. By fighting back and holding her accountable, I not only protected my own rights, but also made the neighborhood better for everyone. 5 years after the garage was completed, I decided to sell my house and move to a different state for work reasons. The real estate agent told me that the garage was a major selling point and probably added $30,000 to the home's value. The house sold within 3 days of listing at full asking price, with multiple offers from buyers who specifically mentioned the garage in their offer letters. At the closing, the buyers told me they loved the garage and planned to use it as an art studio. They had also researched the property's history and knew about the conflict with Sharon. We looked into the HOA very carefully before making an offer, the wife told me. We wanted to make sure they weren't going to be a nightmare. Everything we heard about the current board was positive, and several people mentioned how much the neighborhood improved after that crazy president was removed. I signed the closing documents with a sense of satisfaction. The garage that Sharon had fought so hard to prevent had become a valuable asset that attracted buyers and enhanced the neighborhood. Her vindictive campaign had failed completely, and the reforms that resulted from her misconduct had made the community stronger. As I drove away from my former home for the last time, I looked back at the garage visible from the street. It stood as a testament to the importance of knowing your rights, documenting everything, and refusing to be bullied by people who abuse their authority. The structure was just wood and concrete and metal, but it represented something much more significant, the victory of reasonable governance over petty tyranny. I never forgot the lessons I learned from that experience, and I carried them forward to my new home in Colorado. When I bought a house in a neighborhood with an HOA, the first thing I did was review their governing documents carefully and attend a board meeting to assess how they operated. I was relieved to find that they were professional and reasonable, with clear procedures and appropriate limits on board authority. I also made sure to get involved immediately, joining the Architectural Review Committee and helping to update their guidelines to be clearer and more homeowner-friendly. My experience in Scottsdale made me a valuable resource for the board, and I helped them implement many of the reforms that had worked well in my former neighborhood. The garage I eventually built in Colorado was approved without any issues. The process was smooth, professional, and completed exactly as the rules provided. It was a stark contrast to my experience with Sharon, and it reinforced my belief that HOA problems are usually people problems, not system problems. When reasonable people follow reasonable rules, everything works fine. I sometimes wondered what became of Sharon Patterson. Did she ever reflect on how her obsessive need for control had destroyed her reputation, cost her thousands of dollars, and resulted in a criminal conviction? Did she understand that her behavior had been wrong, or did she still see herself as a victim? I would never know, and ultimately it didn't matter. She had paid the price for her actions, and I had moved on with my life. The story of my battle with the HOA became something I shared with other homeowners who faced similar challenges. I wrote articles about HOA reform, spoke at community meetings, and advised people on how to protect their property rights. The experience that had been so stressful at the time became valuable knowledge that I could use to help others. In the end, the garage project that Sharon had tried so hard to stop became one of the best decisions I ever made. It gave me a space to pursue my passions, generated income from my woodworking business, increased my property value, and taught me important lessons about advocacy and community involvement. What Sharon intended as an exercise of power and control instead became a catalyst for positive change. The whole ordeal taught me that justice can prevail when you have the law on your side and the courage to fight for what's right. Sharon had position, authority, and the backing of the HOA when she started her campaign against me. But none of that mattered when confronted with documented facts, valid permits, and the law itself. Her escalating desperation led her to commit crimes that destroyed her credibility and ended her reign as HOA president. Years later, I still received occasional messages from people who had read about my case online or in news articles. Many of them shared their own HOA horror stories and asked for advice. I always encouraged them to document everything, know their rights, and not be afraid to stand up to bullies. Most HOA disputes could be resolved through clear communication and following proper procedures, but some required legal action to protect homeowners from abuse. I also warned people about the dangers of apathy in HOA governance. The people who control your HOA are the people who show up, I would tell them. If you don't participate in elections and board meetings, you're giving power to whoever does show up, and that might be someone like Sharon Patterson who will abuse that power. Get involved, stay informed, and hold your board accountable. My experience in Scottsdale ultimately had a happy ending, but it came at a significant cost in time, money, and stress. The battle with Sharon consumed months of my life and cost me over $40,000 in legal fees, construction delays, and lost work time. While I eventually recovered most of those costs through the settlement and judgment, the emotional toll was harder to quantify. But I never regretted standing up to her. Bullies only win when good people back down. By fighting her every step of the way, documenting her misconduct, and holding her legally accountable, I not only protected my own property rights, but also protected every other homeowner in that neighborhood from future abuse. That made all the struggle worthwhile. The garage stood as a monument to that victory long after I moved away. The new owners enjoyed it just as I had, and it continued to add value to the property and enhance the neighborhood. Sharon's prediction that it would be an eyesore and destroy property values proved to be completely wrong, just like everything else she had claimed. In my new life in Colorado, I sometimes drove past houses with nice garages and workshops and thought about my journey. Building that garage in Scottsdale had seemed like such a simple project when I started, just a basic accessory structure to give me more space and pursue my hobbies. I never imagined it would lead to arrests, lawsuits, news coverage, and municipal reforms. But that's the nature of standing up to injustice. You never know where the path will lead or how far you'll have to go to defend what's right. All you can do is take it one step at a time, armed with documentation, legal rights, and the determination to not let bullies win. In the end, that's exactly what I did, and the garage I built became not just a structure, but a symbol of what's possible when ordinary people refuse to accept unreasonable authority.